Hello everyone, my name is Eric Franklin and this video is about holistic pelvic floor health. In other words, pelvic floor health and strength and flexibility that takes into consideration the whole body. The pelvic floor does not work in isolation. It depends on the state of your legs, your spine, your upper body, but especially on the diaphragm up here. This is your breathing diaphragm. It is the top of a container that is bound below by the pelvic floor and on the side by the abdominal muscles on its front as well, together with fascia. And this container, top, bottom, side walls, is very important for movement in the torso, stability of the spine, but also for pelvic floor health. If you're creating too much pressure in this container, then it's going to be a problem for your pelvic floor. But if these muscles don't work together well, then you're also going to have issues with continence, issues with coordinating your pelvic floor for exercise and sport. So we're going to do exercises for all these different areas and experience how that's going to help the function of our pelvic floor. And the link between all these structures is fascia. So here we're going to first put our fingers on our rib cage right through here. So if you feel the ribs, the bottom ribs here, this is where your diaphragm attaches. So the bottom 6 ribs to the bottom of the sternum and to the lumbar spine. If we look here at our skeletal model, this would be the location of the breathing diaphragm. 80% of your breathing work happens with the help of this muscle and associated fascias. When you inhale, this muscle is going to go down a little and flatten out. When you exhale, it's going to come back up. So we need to do an exercise for that. Then you have one abdominal muscle here, but most of your abdominal muscles are located here at the side, external oblique, internal oblique, and horizontal transversus abdominis. So they can be found between the pelvic bone here, between the top of the ilium, which is called the iliac crest right there, and the bottom of the rib cage. That's the place to locate these muscles. So we're going to increase the tone of those muscles with a little bit of tapping with our hands. Then, of course, the pelvic floor itself. And the pelvic floor is located between these two bones. These are the sit bones, the pubic bone in front and the tailbone sacrum here in back. And it contains many layers of muscles and fascia. And I have an upcoming course where we're going to discuss this in detail. But just a quick look into the pelvic bowl, and what you can see is the muscular diaphragm here. This, of course, should be covered with fascia. But you also have here in the front area a so-called urogenital triangle. And the main part of that is the perineal membrane. So you also have sphincter control here at the front. And that is another very important aspect of training that often gets ignored a little bit. Training the pelvic floor. There are many offerings in that area, but one of the simplest and most effective things you can do that actually works is to squat. In other words, to flex your hip joints, because that's going to cause a coupled motion, an associated motion of the bones of the pelvic outlet, the 2 sit bones and the tailbone sacrum here, and also here at the front. What's going to happen when you squat is that the sit bones, these 2 bumps right there, are going to go out. And when you come back up and extend your legs, they're going to go back in. At the same time, when you squat, when you flex your hips, the tail and sacrum are going to move back there at the bottom. And when you extend your hips, back to the front. So if you can flex your hips, you can train your pelvic floor. And that's why standing up and sitting down from your chair should do it. If you do a lot of sitting work, do that every 45 minutes, 10 times, stand up, sit down from your chair. You also got some terrific pelvic floor training. So let's find our hip joints. They're right here in this area of the crease between the legs and the pelvis. And if you do that, you're going to have a widening of the pelvic outlet. You might be able to feel that. Probably feel it better if you put your fingers on your sit bones for a moment. So I know it's maybe not the easiest thing to do if you're doing this for the first time, but you can really feel the pelvic outlet widening, the pelvic floor muscles stretching, lengthening. When you flex your hips, when you come back up, this whole area will become more tight, more toned, and more shortened. So you don't want to stay in this place where everything's tight. You also don't want to stay in the place where everything's always stretched. You want to find that middle ground. You want to keep training those muscles as if you would be training your biceps. So here we go. What can we do for the diaphragm? Very simple. We can tap the area where the diaphragm is located, but we can also stretch the diaphragm. All muscles need a little moment of lengthening during the day, and probably the most important muscle to lengthen, to give a little stretch, is your diaphragm. And we usually never do that. We'll stretch all kinds of things if you do stretching, quads and whatnot, but not the diaphragm, which is the one muscle, if it doesn't work well, then that's it. So we're going to take our arm up, we're going to go to the side. So I'm going to start with my right arm up and go to the left, and then I'm going to tap the area here where my diaphragm inserts into the ribs. And then I'm going to just breathe in and out, very relaxed breathing, don't force it, just normal breathing as you tap. There we go. And let's come back up. Easiest thing you can do to stretch your diaphragm. Let's compare sides for a moment, and you'll notice if you breathe into the lung on the side you practice, it's going to feel more volume in that area, just easier to breathe. And if you do a lateral flexion, you'll feel you even got a little more flexible on that side. Then for the abdominal muscles here on the side, we're just going to tap them as we do lateral flexion, same thing. And that's going to increase their tone. They're just going to be coming a little more alive through there. Very good. Then we're going to touch our sit bone on that side. So we're going to find our sit bone again, and we're going to squat and come back up. We're just going to imagine that sit bone go out to the side and come back in. Out to the side and come back in. You can think of it as a pendulum swinging out and back in as you do your squat. Let's do a little faster if you can. Very good. Just a few times. Excellent. And finally, we'll do something for the lower back on that same side. We'll put our hand here, our knuckles, on the lower back on that same right side, and just give it a rub right through there. And you can do your squats as you rub this area a little bit, because if you have tension in your lower back, then you're going to have tension in the pelvic floor. Because the lower back and pelvic floor muscles, they work together. They're so-called antagonists for some movements that happen in the pelvic bones. Now we're going to compare sides, because comparing sides after doing an exercise on one side, it's very good to learn how to improve your movement. So, do you feel a difference between the sides? Maybe the shoulder's more relaxed, maybe you're breathing more easily on that side. Then balance on that leg, on the side you practice, and just notice how much tone you have in the pelvis. How lifted does your pelvis feel? If you can imagine the pelvic floor there, just on the inside of that sit bone, what does that feel like? Compared to the other side, and you might feel the shoulder is tighter, not as balanced, the pelvis is not as lifted, somehow the sit bone is pointing too far back, your lower back is a little scrunched. So all the things we just did really help to integrate this side. Probably also help the other side. There's always a transfer to the other side. So probably want to do the other side. Very simple sequence of things you can do for integrated pelvic floor health. So let's tap our diaphragm. Do some breathing. Inhale, exhale. Very good. Good, 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 good. Then come back up. Let's tap our abdominal wall with a little lateral flexion, focusing on these abdominal muscles. Very good. Excellent. Then let's just give our lower back a little rub. There we go. You can do it with a little squat if you want. Excellent. Then we're going to find our sit bone on the other side, and just imagine that sit bone going out and in as you squat. Of course, the sit bone is going to be going back, but you want to think of it also going out, because that is the stretching, widening of the pelvic floor when you're flexing your hip. Then let's touch the sit bones with both hands. Sit bone out and in, out and in. Let's do a little faster if you can. There we go. Excellent. Good, good, good. Let's finish with a little tap of the gluteus, tap of the lower back. There we go. And then let's notice how we feel. Probably more lifted in the pelvis, more toned in the pelvic floor, shoulders drop. Now that's a sign that you've really helped this whole area, and especially the pelvic floor. And if you enjoyed this video, then please press subscribe. We have a lot more great stuff waiting for you. And also, if you want to know all about the pelvic floor and its fascia, I have a 3-day pelvic floor fascia course coming up. Please join. We will learn so much. We will be so much more healthier after that course. And if you're an educator, you're going to have lots more skills and tools in your toolbox. See you next time. Stay healthy and well. Bye-bye.